So good day, Chairman and distinguished guests. We have with us today the amazing Dave Friedman, one of the godfathers of the pedalboard and rack, definitely on the Mount Rushmore of rig builders. And we are proud to have him here today to discuss with us, I think, a topic that I'm always interested to learn more on, and certainly hearing it from somebody like Dave is always an educational experience. We're going to be talking about the evolution of the wet, dry, wet rig and how we can perhaps implement some of the things that we can glean from the original wet, dry, wet rigs of the 80s and 90s, and how we might be able to implement some of those things in our rigs today in creating sort of a current day version of a wet, dry, wet rig, not using rack gear, but presumably pedals. And then maybe get into some of the gear and equipment that Dave feels is most emblematic of that era of equipment and sounds. And maybe just some general recommendations, having been a rig builder for so many years. We would, of course, love to pick his brain on all of the materials and resources that he's willing to share with us so that we may implement that into our own, again, DIY rigs. So welcome, Dave. Thank you so much for being here.
Pleasure.
Welcome.
Nice to meet you guys.
You too.
And I spoke to you earlier. Your stage name is Dave, but your real name is David. So we can go by
either. I never seem to care. Doesn't matter. Hey, you is fine too.
So maybe, Dave, what we could start with is maybe just for a definition for somebody who has never heard this term before, or they've somehow associated wet, dry, wet with something that maybe doesn't have anything to do with pedalboards. How might we define for the listener what you would consider to be sort of a general definition of wet, dry, wet?
Well, I mean, it kind of has two definitions, sort of, although people put it in different ways. Now, wet, dry, wet to me, the original wet, dry, wet was started by Bob Bradshaw. So originally we had stereo guitar rigs. So everyone was doing stereo. Now this is pre-guitar preamps even. They were doing loaded down amplifiers with a load resistor as a big preamp into into a stereo effects guitar rig. Everything was in stereo. There was dry mixed in with the wet. Everything was in stereo. Well, from my understanding from talking to Bob and everything, so what happened was he realized that, just a load resistor on an amp wasn't really the best thing for sound, really. It's kind of compressed, and it's not like we know today, like a reactive load. And so he started using cabinets for loads. But first, those cabinets were just buried. They were in a box, or there was a speaker, a 112 in a little enclosed device, and for basically a reactive load, because it sounded better, sounded more natural through the rig, through the stereo rig.
Was there a certain speaker that was typical of this that they would use? I would imagine it had to be something that could handle the wattage of the amp.
Well, early on, I mean, there was there was a company called Flag Systems that made those carpeted guitar racks like you saw from the 80s that were, actually, they're continued today with, what's the company called today? Stagecraft is one of the original guys from Flag Systems, and he still makes similar racks. But they used to make a little 112 box that had a sealed front that was screwed on. And often Bob would put EVs, EV 12Ls, 300 watt speakers in there to be able to handle that. But, every speaker has a different tone for a load on an amplifier.
Absolutely.
So if it's a Vintage 30, or if it's a EV, or if it's this, it's all reactive, but what comes out that line out that feeds your rack sounds totally different.
Absolutely.
So that's kind of an interesting thing. So eventually it was like, well, why are we even doing that? Why don't we have the dry cabinet on stage with our stereo guitar rig? So the first wet, dry wets weren't really wet in the outside cabinets at all. They were a mix. It was the stereo guitar rig, a mix of dry and wet, and a dry cabinet. That was the pure sound with nothing unadulterated in it. And this was kind of post pedals and in rack gear era, you know? So really no one was using pedals at the time. Mm-hmm. They were in the 70s, and then as it went into the 80s, they stopped using pedals, and then it went the other way again later.
Could you just for a moment, Dave? So the first incarnation with the resistive loaded amplifiers, what era would you say that was? Was that late 70s? Was that early 80s?
Well, it might have started. I mean, that was more in the 80s, I think. But there might have been some people doing it back in, say, the Paul Rivera era.
Yeah.
You know?
Right. And then when would you say that it started to migrate into moving that dry cabinet on the stage? By mid 80s?
Probably by mid 80s.
Yeah.
That's when Bob started doing it.
And in both these iterations, you talked about the kind of, for lack of a better term, the original stereo rigs, and then the dry cab comes on stage. In both of these iterations, the wet effects and stereo are still at this stage in parallel for the most part in a rack. Is that correct?
Always. Yep. Always in parallel. Yeah. So, always in parallel because, you weren't, in those times, you wanted to do that to just preserve the tone because you didn't want A to D and D to A conversions. You didn't want that going on.
So the
was that the main
necessary
reason? Was that the main reason over having multiple wet effects in series running into each other? Because I presume a lot of these wet effects were mono in, stereo out. Is that right? And so it might not have even been an option to run.
Correct.
Like we know today, delay into reverb. That wasn't as easily, done back then.
No, most of the stuff was in parallel, or sometimes there was two mixer sections, so they could kind of pre-mix one set of effects and then feed it into, say, a reverb. Yeah. And that's returning to another mixer. So there's almost like two mixers in the rig. And so hence you get
serial mixers.
Yeah. But there was always issues with this because, like you said, there were mono inputs most of the time. There were some that were stereo. But then the other question was, if they have two inputs, are they actually really stereo? Some units...
Oh, this is a whole nother rabbit trail. I love it.
Some units had the dry path that was straight through, discrete left and right, but then they would sum into the effects, into the A to D. They would sum the inputs, so it really wasn't stereo through the reverb or anything. So it depends. Yeah, so it was actually almost easier just to put them in parallel.
Yeah,
it's fine. It was fine.
And it made but it required a mixer in that case. You had to have a mixer in order to use those effects.
You had to have a mixer. So this is so when, let's say, all the effects were off, you had 3 cabinets that were dry, equal volume. So now these are the rigs that spawned the latter version. But what I mean by this is the Eddie Van Halen rig. Mm-hmm. This is the Steve Stevens rig. This is Joe Holmes, who was with Ozzy rig. This is anyone that was doing the wet, dry, wet at that point in time was exactly what I was just describing. This later changed a little where the wet was all wet. So first person I kind of saw do that. It wasn't that wide. I mean, the big guys, it was mostly what I described, for the big rock kind of guys at the time. The all wet, Michael Landau did that. Scott Henderson did that kind of thing.
With the MPX-1, he was doing an all wet.
I mean,
with the MPX-1.
ladder, exactly. So you would take so say you have a vintage amp, let's call it anything, a deluxe reverb or something. And you take a line out box off of that, feed it into your effect, and you can use a relatively small power amp because, the volume of the wet cabinets don't have to be that loud. They can be, 10%, 15% of what the actual volume of the amp is. So that was 100% wet, and you're just blending that in very much like you would do, say, in a recording studio, and if you brought up effects on the board and you're just blending wet effects in with kind of doing that. The problem with that rig, fundamentally, that's a cool idea. You can almost do it with anything. You could take a line out and feed an effect and feed it into another deluxe reverb input. It's a power amp. It's all wet. You can kind of shape it with the EQ even to however you want it to sound. And you're going to keep it pretty low. The problem is, like in a live situation, you have to have your own sound guy. Because, so say it's just wet, dry, not even wet, dry, wet. They have to have equal volumes of the mics. And if they're not seeing they're gonna boost that effect channel way the hell up because they don't know. It's just like both mics, same volume, exactly. Don't change it. And it becomes a nightmare. At least with the old rig, even if they took the stereo side, there was dry mixed in. It might be a little wetter than they intended, but they're still dry mixed in,
Yeah.
So that was the quick version of how it evolved.
I remember also seeing one with Michael Landau where he was using the MPX1, where he was actually miking the dry amp and then sending it into an Aphex mic pre, those Tube Essence
Correct.
ones, and then feeding that into the MPX1. So he was actually using the microphone instead of the line out to get the signal from the dry cabinet into the MPX1. Do you have any feeling on how that works versus using the line out, or what your preference was?
Now, that concept was done much later.
Yeah, that was like with the Seal Tour, maybe mid-90s.
Yeah. I mean, that never got that popular. A few people did that. I just think it could be a cool thing. Very complicated. You can mess it up. You can mess it up really bad.
Yeah.
If the mic gets hit, hey, no effects. Okay,
Right. Right.
I don't know if it necessarily sounds any better.
Yeah.
Really. I mean, if it's all wet, what does that sound like? You know what I mean? Like it's you got a reverb on that's some sort of reverb that's already dampened or bright or some sort of affected reverb. And what does that really sound like? I don't know. You change the EQs on the power amp you're using, or change it's all sort of, I don't know. What does that sound like? Make it sound like however you want it to sound and blend it in.
Yeah.
All those rigs come with problems, though. I mean, I see the point, especially if you have a vintage amp. You have a vintage amp, vintage old Marshall, old Fender, old high watt, or whatever, things like that. A wet dry or a wet dry wet thing makes a lot of sense because you're not going to put an effects loop. It's not even going to work in that kind of amp. You can mix, blend in, your studio style delays or your pedal, post sounding delays, so to speak. Not preamp, and it sounds great that way. The line out, yeah. I think the line out worked fine. I don't know if the mic was any better.
Yeah. Well, I suppose it's sort of the path of least resistance, and also, you have some variability. Like I suppose with the mic pre, you had some options as far as, how hot you set it, but you were probably limited in the types of effects you could have except after the mic pre. Because you've already coming in mic level, you probably have to pretty much use, unless you've modded it somehow or you have the ability to drive it all the way down, let's say to like -20 or something like that. You probably couldn't just run pedals there if you wanted to run pedals at some point in that chain afterward.
No, you'd have to pad it way down.
Yeah. So
sure.
I want to continue along these lines, Dave, but I want to interrupt for just a moment to talk about a couple of sponsors that make the podcast possible. I'm going to turn it over to Grant.
Thank you, guys. So I wanted to tell you guys about two of our sponsors. The first one, you've heard us talk about them before on the podcast, the Guitar Sanctuary, where Brian is currently sipping on some triple filtered water. The Miata's parked out front. It's been a good day at the Guitar Sanctuary. A lot of the gear we're talking about today will be at the Guitar Sanctuary. Once you get it, Brian can chuck it on a pedal board for you, set it up, and get you the rig of your dreams. So check out theguitarsanctuary.com and see what they've got on offer. I also wanted to tell you guys about monocreators.com. They do my favorite gig bags, pedalboard soft bags, and backpacks, as well as they have a new line of power supplies. They do some lightweight pedal boards, just some all-around incredible gear. And you can actually get 10% off at their website, monocreators.com, using the code Chairmen, CHAIRMEN, for 10% off at monocreators.com. Those are our first two sponsors for the day. Thank you, guys. Dave, I do have a question for you coming out of this. The wet, dry, wet rigs, everything you've been talking about so far, all I'm thinking about is like, what a hassle. Like, why would people go to the extra hassle, bring your own sound guy just so you don't have to explain every night, I need you to keep these wet levels low, don't gain them up like the dry. Like, there's just so much going on, so many inherent problems. Why would these guys in the 80s approach these rigs or even consider them? Like, what were the benefits?
You've obviously never played one like this.
I have. I'm just kind of asking for the sake of our listeners.
Well, I mean, like what I was talking about, the rock guys like Eddie Van Halen and stuff, originally you had, this great, whatever amp at the time was being used, a great center amp sounding great, your wet cabs with dry in them, which is how that was used, 3 4x12s. That sounds like
heaven.
Just unbelievably great. And, in this day and age of Kempers and all this, oh, give me a break. Come on. I mean, it's not even a tenth of the sound that was created by something like that. I mean, you play 3 chords through Steve Stevens guitar rig or something loud. It was like, oh my God. We used to set up at NAMM shows with Friedman, and we used to set up and we used to do that all the time. We'd have a wet, dry, wet 3 4x12s in there in our demo room with an amp switcher that was switched through whatever amp you wanted. Just a couple delays. That was it. It was nothing, couple. Everyone was just like, oh my God, how do I do that?
I remember the LA Amp show, you had done that. And you had a full rack. And I remember you had the bathtub was full of beer.
Yep.
And
this is my kind of amp show.
The wet, dry, wet
I
rig
miss
going.
those. Those are fun.
It's probably in the early 2010s.
Yeah.
I remember.
Would this translate just as well onto an album? Like if you were listening blindfolded to an album, maybe something that you weren't familiar with, with your trained ear, would you be able to pick out like, oh yeah, they're using a wet, dry, wet rig versus maybe reamping or versus another approach?
An album is kind of a totally different sort of thing. It's an album ultimately is generally blended parts. It's like a double tracked guitar and or even more with multiple parts blending all together. Generally speaking, they're not doing these kind of effects and stuff, or they're adding them post later in the mixer, which is very similar sounding. You're taking the full sound and then just blending in, on auxes, those effects.
Through the mix bus, they're just blending them in parallel.
So no,
anyway.
you're not going to necessarily hear this at all. And stereo recorded parts on albums, this doesn't, unless it's something very specific, doesn't happen that much,
Yep.
It's so no, it's not really about that. It's more about your pleasure on stage.
Yep.
Mhm.
I love it.
Yeah, and it's really good.
Yeah. But
So,
coincidentally,
yes, we don't do it much anymore. But a small version of it is just a wet dry too. And that still sounds great too. With dry blended in or not, and then just all wet. But it is a little bit problematic if you're not playing big shows. If you're playing at the bar, doing a wet dry or a wet dry wet where all that's wet. I mean, if they're not miking it up and you're just relying on stage sound, maybe it works. If they're miking it up, well, you better say, hey,
Here's my list of
Set
instructions.
it like this.
Yeah.
Set it like this. At that point in time, I almost think a mono rig might be superior, in some small formats like that. But it can be done. It just, it depends on what kind of amp you have, what kind of amp you're using. If you're using an amp.
Ryan, did you want to chime in?
I hope you're using an amp. Please use an amp.
See, that's what I was just about to bring that up, because there's a lot of times where there's a lot of people that are like, hey, how do we talk about, it's like you go to the grocery store hungry, so you just buy like every freaking thing you can find because you're hungry. It just, your bill's like $800 and you're like, I didn't need half this. It's sometimes the same thing with like people that come in for builds where they're like, I have to have wet, dry, wet. I have to have stereo. I have to have this. And I'm like asking them, like, okay, well, what are you doing? And 90% are running direct into a system. So they're running Iridiums or ACS ones or HX Stomps, and they're doing all these things. And I guess, there's a lot of times, a lot of people don't know. They're like, oh yeah, I'm doing it because everyone else is doing it. I'm like, well, how are you doing it, or why are you doing it? And do you think like a wet, dry, wet setup in like a lot of these ampless situations, there's even like something that needs to be like done? Like I understand it from a live tube amp, and I played through a wet, dry, wet through amps, and I agree, it does sound amazing. Do you think any of these guys that are doing these direct options, like it's even something that needs to be utilized or like worried about doing?
Not at all.
Yeah.
I mean, at that point, you've already, shot yourself in the foot. I mean, I'm sorry. I mean, like a direct solution. I understand.
I love it.
I understand the point of the direct solution. I get it. And maybe there's some future things coming out that will be, a more analog version of a direct solution. But, a modeler, if we're just talking modelers, are quite good. Neural is a great modeler. It sounds great if you spend all the time to profile your amps and spend all the time. Hey, you still have to have the amps to profile.
Yes.
And it's as good as it probably gets at the moment. So that, props to Neural for that. But man, I don't know if you see this, but guitar players are not always, shall we say, the brightest. and you know what? After a while, it's like a lot of guitar players, they get tired of the menus. They get tired of the pages. They get tired of all this, and they just want to, like, even if it's just a deluxe reverb, they want to plug their pedal board into a deluxe reverb, turn a couple knobs, and have a sound in 5 seconds.
Sure.
Instead of, wait, I've got to change the amount of gain on this and the effect. Okay, what page is this on? And then I have to go here, and okay, well, it's already like,
You already passed it, yeah.
You're doing less playing and more tweaking forever and ever and ever. And I see this over and over and over again with people. And also in a live format, this soundless stage. If you're going to see a concert with the soundless stage and you were up close, up front, where you're not hearing anything, you're not hearing the PA even, really. You're barely, and they don't really have anything up front that's really, you're hearing drums.
You can hear a Les Paul acoustically, maybe.
Yeah. It's just defeating to me. It's just, And I've also seen bills where some of the bands have real amps and then some have modelers. And I swear to God, every time real amps sound better out front. Every single time.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I just went to a concert this past week, and the guy was like, man, we'd invite you side stage to watch, but all you're going to hear is the drums. You're not going to hear there's no stage volume. And they were all running quad cortexes. And I've seen more and more recently there, another band that I listened to, the guy was like, oh yeah, we split, direct out of our quads to go to XLR front of house in-ear monitors. And then we have, I think it's like the Seymour Duncan power. I think it's like their power amp
the
that's
power
going
stage,
to the power stage that's going to like 2 412s. And I asked like, what's the reason why? He goes, well, mainly because of the people up front, so they don't get gypped on, where they're standing, so it doesn't just sound like drums. And plus for the feel of it, because I think that's a big thing too. Can be is like, especially on stage, like feeling the amps. Because I was in a band years ago, and I remember everyone cranking up their amps, and you could, we didn't have in-ear monitors and stuff. So it's been interesting to see that too. The state, like the noise, like it's quieter on stage than it is out in the crowd because everything's so direct. And that's the one thing that's been interesting is people are like, oh, I have to have this, I have to have that, and it's the dry. It's like, oh yeah, well I mix the dry with this and I do that, and like sometimes it's just like, it's not.
It's a mess.
Needed. Yeah,
it's a mess.
It's complicated for the sound guy. That's like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this third channel. I guess I'll just run it hotter, and then it's just it becomes a mess.
Yeah, the other issue too is a guitar is a reactive instrument, right? So all these sounds, all these great records from the past and that you've heard, and the bands that have existed forever. There was a imagine Jimi Hendrix on a modeler. Just think about that. So the danger in music, the modelers have taken it right out. So there is no interaction with an amp anymore. There's no like, hey, if I bend into the cabinet, I'll get a little feedback, or I'll get a little of this, I'll get a little of that. So now let's do the modeler. Let's go direct. Oh, but wait, I need a monitor on stage in this part so I can bend it to get feedback. What? I mean, it's like there's no spontaneity in any of that. There's no danger. The danger has been stripped out of rock.
Yeah.
Or any music for all that matter. And I don't know. It's just
rock and roll has been castrated.
That's a bad path. A bad path.
Yeah.
I think.
Rock and roll is castrated, Dave. That's what you said.
Kind of.
That's what
yes,
you're saying.
Rock and roll's been castrated. Exactly.
By the modelers.
By the modelers. I mean, like I said, the Neural is a great product,
Yeah.
I mean, it's a great product, and I think it does serve a purpose in some respect.
For sure.
But when you were talking about the Seymour Duncan power stage, it's an okay power amp. It's just okay. It's not very good. It doesn't really sound right.
Okay.
I mean, it's a Class D power amp, and it's just kind of gutless. It has no thump to it. It's just kind of there.
It's no Fryette or VHT or
H&H. It's none
or,
of that, or even some of the great solid state amps from the
like
past.
Matrix or stuff like that.
Matrix is better. The old amps were better. H&H's were better. There's actually a cool new power amp you can get. The Chris Lord Algae monitors, studio monitors that they have now. Well, they also make power amps, right? Avatone makes power amps.
Really?
They make a single rack space power amp that has guts. It's a little heavy, but it has guts.
How many watts is it?
I don't know, like 100 a side or something.
Well, as you said, you don't need to have huge ones for wet, dry, wet.
No, that's a single rack space. They make also a 2 space and a 3 space, I think, that are bigger, more power. But that single rack space one, I mean, it has XLR ins and banana plugs out, so you have to deal with that. But It sounds really good as far for a solid state power amp. It's got all the punch and all the great, no fan.
Mm-hmm.
It's an awesome power amp for that kind of stuff.
Do you still like those Marshall 5050s, like what Landau used to use?
Those are good.
The
those
valve
are
state?
good. But those were really good for all wet. You know, I mean, they were good even for not all wet, but yeah, they worked well for that.
And some Pacific 112 cabs.
Oh, come on. I've been doing this a long time. I remember all that shit. Been doing this since 1990.
I remember seeing a guy with a beard trimmer shaving because the cabs would get too fuzzy after you travel with him for a while. And so he would kind of like tame it down like a road guy, shaving it with a beard trimmer. Or one of those wall, give yourself a buzz. Just go out there and trim them down.
Wow. Ouch.
I want to break again for just a moment to talk about a couple of sponsors that make the podcast possible every single week. The first of which are our friends over at Sweetwater and the Sweetwater Gear Exchange. This is a really cool program that Sweetwater has launched in the last year where they're in essence trying to compete with companies like Reverb and the Electronic Bay, aka eBay, where they are taking players' used gear, allowing them to have a platform to sell it on. And the coolest thing about it is if you sell through Sweetwater's website and the Gear Exchange and you decide to keep your proceeds on a Sweetwater gift card, you do not pay any fees. You get to keep 100% of the earnings that you make when you're selling. And it's a really cool way to almost create sort of a layaway program in essence, where you're saving up for something that you want on the Sweetwater website. You sell through enough gear and you're able to buy that piece of gear fully without having to come out of pocket and any expense to yourself. And in fact, I just received my custom shop 61 Strat from my proceeds from the Gear Exchange. So shout out to sales engineer Todd Cotton for making it possible.
Awesome.
So just wanted to name that. And head over to sweetwater.com/used. You can get buying, get selling. You can start an account for free. And it is a wonderful program. I really, really dig it. Also wanted to talk about Neural DSP. We've been talking about the Quad Cortex, and I agree with Dave. It is a great tool to use. If you are somebody that is playing in a band and guitar is not the driver, so often these days guitarists are ornamental on stage, and sometimes there's just not a budget for cartridge or things like that, and so you have to go with something like a Kemper or the Quad Cortex or whatever it is that's out there. And I do feel like the Neural DSP and the Quad Cortex have some amazing sounds in it. We're going to be releasing a video soon with Ryan Morgan, who's one of the reps over there at Neural DSP. We're also going to be having him live on the show. We're going to be going through some of the stuff that we created. We modeled some of the amplifiers that I have here, including my 65 Bandmaster, my 78 JMP50. So some cool stuff that we modeled, and some of it did really, really amazingly well and surprisingly well. And I see it as a great tool. But beyond that, they're offering our listeners 30% off all of their plugins, and they're going to soon have software to be able to take any of the plugins that you've purchased and actually import them into the Quad Cortex. So you have even more flexibility beyond what it's already capable of. Get 30% off any of their plugins using the coupon code Chairmen, CHAIRMEN, over on neuraldsp.com. That applies to all of the plugins except for new releases. New releases will be available after, 60 days, 90 days?
90,
you'll be able to
90 days.
90 days you'll be able to redeem that same coupon code for any new plugins that they have, but everything else is on the table. So definitely check that out, whether you're into Tosin Abasi, Corey Wong, Pliny, Tom Morello. They have so many different options on there. So please do check that out. All right, Dave, back to you.
Back to me.
Back to you. So we were talking a little bit about power amps. You were mentioning a few that work well. Maybe this might be a good transition into if you were trying to create a wet, dry, wet rig with pedals, given today's equipment, what are some of the pieces of gear that you see as being, sort of as equivalent as possible And also, what are maybe some of the accessories and products that you need to support, let's say, a wet, dry, wet rig, either in terms of mixers or switchers or power amps and things like that. Can you kind of give us a overview of kind of doing it now and maybe some of the different options that might exist out there?
You know, it's funny. It's not done too much anymore, really. I mean, yes, you can do it. You could do it with all combo amps or something. You know, you could do everything in front even. That could be done.
Does it present a challenge having all those extra preamps though involved? Because then if you're plugging into the inputs of other amps.
No, I mean, you know, theoretically you could do this on a pedal board. You could route. So say you have, okay, just hypothetically, you have some drive pedals, compressor, whatever else you'd put in front of an amp, right? You know, or whatever is not time based. And you could then split off and go to a dry, so-called dry amp. And at that point also split off into some wet effects. Now, we have to decide, are these other amps going to be all wet? Are they going to have dry? I don't know. Yeah, that's a decision to be made, how this works. If you're going to have dry, I mean, you're still probably best with a mixer, because if you're seriousing all wet effects, doesn't really work. And if you have split off to the dry amp, and then you do have dry through these effects, like say an Eventide or something, or Eventide H90 or something, you know, that dry is latent. Yeah. So you're going to get a comb filtering between the three amps. So
no analog need, dry through.
Unless you either need the effects to have analog dry through. Most Boss effects do. Mm-hmm. You know, DD500 has analog dry path as long as you don't change one thing in it, and I forget what that is. You know, the new, well, we'll get into some of the effects in a minute, but you got to know something about this, you know? You just can't have that comb filtering. That's the biggest mistake the average user will make, and they'll just go, I could just go like this, right? And go like that. Yeah, it sounds great. Really? Sounds like there's a wah cocked on.
Right.
You know, or this weird, like, you know, flanger turned all the way down or something. It's just, no, wrong. So as far as like pedalboard mixers go, there's only two that really, well, that stand out to me that work really well. Musicom Labs, they have a new version of theirs. That's a switcher and a mixer all in one.
And has MIDI.
Yeah, it has MIDI. So it's really useful for switching the input side of the effects on and off, you know, which is how it was done.
In stock.
I do. I actually have a bunch of those in stock. I bought a bunch when they first shipped them. So if anyone's interested, they can email me at racksystems@yahoo.com, which is my, or friedmanamps@gmail.com. One of the two I'll get. Either one I'll get. I mean, the rig building is more the Rack Systems one, and the amp is more the Friedman one. But, you know, you can find me if you guys are interested in that. I think ultimately that's probably the most useful one. RJM just reissued their little one in a really small pedal. And if you are using a switcher or something, or you just need to mix some things, I think the RJM's awesome. But with that, I mean, you don't have the front end switching, meaning the inputs to the effects and stuff like the Musicom. But I do believe it's also cheaper, I think. I don't know how much that is.
Yeah, it's a lot cheaper.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you're just trying to mix a few things, I think it serves a good purpose. Yeah. You sort of, you know, the average user is not going to know how to really work this stuff or put this together. You know, that's why you have guys like, I've been, you know, building rigs. We still build rigs forever. That's why you've built rigs, you build rigs, everyone builds rigs. Because it's not a simple thing. People think it's just such a simple thing. It's not simple. It takes a lot of hours, a lot of time, a lot of soldering, and honestly, a lot of experience. You don't, when you first start, and when everyone first started, they didn't really know what they were doing. And over time, you learn what you're doing, you shudder to think the early days, and then,
Oh, so I'm not the only one.
Yeah, no, you shudder to think on some of the early days.
Yep.
But yeah, you learn. So, experience is really the key, So, God, I don't even want to know how.
And 30, I tell everybody,
30 some odd years experience now.
Yeah. I tell everybody that the difference between, let's say, hiring, a Dave Friedman or some guy local to them that's, done it for a year is maybe it's fine if there's like no complications. But as soon as there's an issue, you got somebody that's got 30 years of tools that they've developed to throw at a problem versus a guy that's got 1 year. And, there's going to be a lot more like, I've seen that 1,000 times for a Dave Friedman versus, Joe Smith, who's building rigs out of his garage. It's like, I've never seen this before. I have no idea how to solve this. And I'm sure that you've gone through and corrected, things on people who, wanted to try to do it in a, cheaper way. And there is something to be said for experience, and you definitely are getting what you pay for when it comes to these complicated rigs and guys that just have, how many hundreds of rigs have you built that have, used a wet, dry, wet? I mean, I probably you can't count.
I can't count, and not even wet, dry, wet. Everything, stereo, pedal boards, every kind of rig known to man. I mean, 33 years, of doing it all the time for 33 years.
Yeah.
So, that's a lot. I shudder to think how many solder connections have been done over that time. I wonder how many ends I've gone through. It's a lot.
But now that you've transitioned to solderless, Dave, you don't have to worry about that.
Yeah, no.
Throw that iron out.
Throw that.
I was about to say, what?
Let's say no. Don't use solderless.
Just say no to solderless. Friends don't let friends go solderless.
Some of them can be done well, but you still have to have experience to know how to do them well.
Yeah.
And still, I don't trust them. It's like, so you have a board full of solderless, and there's some buzz or there's something cutting in and out. Okay, which cable?
Good luck.
Good luck finding which cable. I mean, like, you might be able to find which cable, maybe if you wiggle stuff around for a while, and you might be able to narrow it down if you know how to troubleshoot. So most average guitar players don't know how to troubleshoot. They don't know how to start. Hey, okay, plug into the amp. Is that working right? Okay, great.
Mm-hmm.
Let's move on and come down the line. Where does it stop working?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, the experience will teach you immediately. When someone says something, you're like, oh, I think I know what that is. Go here, do this.
Yep.
And that's it. Okay, there you go. There were all sorts of gear over the years. Gear manufacturers by far never make anything. A lot of gear manufacturers never make anything that works perfectly. A lot of them have inherent issues in the gear themselves that they're just not aware of. What always boggles my mind is pedal companies that will ship a pedal with a switching power supply wall wart or something, that this particular switching power supply wall wart buzzes. If you just plug the pedal into the amp, straight into the amp, and the wall wart in there, there's noise. How do you ship a product like that? How do you ship a product like that?
Yeah,
I don't understand. Because they've never listened to the pedal into, like, say, a dirty amp.
Mm-hmm.
And like in building the rigs over the years too, I've learned we test the rigs into dirty amps because it amplifies every last bit
Yep.
of noise in the rig.
Yep.
And if you're testing a rig into a clean deluxe reverb,
Yeah, you're not going
I'm
to hear
sorry,
all
you
of it.
just won't hear it. You
Yeah.
won't. It's masked. You don't hear it at
Yep.
all.
Yep.
You know, I mean, we'll put it into a high gain amp, and then you'll hear every last little tiny thing amplified. You know, oh, there's some digital
JCM
noise in
900.
there.
That was my test amp for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, whatever. Just something dirt. You know, anything dirty. You know, that you will amplify everything. Oh
Yeah.
wow, it's really hissy. Why is it really hissy? Oh, it's this one line 6 chorus pedal they used to make. Whatever that stupid one was that the tank looking things are.
Yeah.
Those things hiss like crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, and into a clean amp, of course, you don't hear it, but you know, you do into the dirty, and you know, that's an important thing. When someone says, "Oh, my rig doesn't have any noise," and they describe the rig to me, and I know that there's 1,000 ground loops, and I'm like, yeah, no, it has noise. I guarantee you it has noise.
Yeah.
But I don't hear it.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
experience.
I hear you though.
You know,
on the power supply thing. I mean, I think that they must just get to the end of the pedal, and they're just like, how do we get the cheapest? You know, we have to provide a supply. So how do we?
They don't listen. They're sometimes they're engineers, and they're like, yeah, it's functioning. Okay, great. That's not really functioning.
Yeah,
with that power supply.
Yeah, I mean, they're going to Jamco or whatever and just looking for specs.
Yeah. Who was it? Someone, some switcher company. I can't remember now. Maybe it was Free the Tone or something. They shipped me a switcher, and I just plugged it in with the wall wart that came with it, and it's just like buzzing like crazy. You put it in a proper power supply, it's fine. You know, like how do you do that? You need to consult more people here,
right?
that know what they're doing, because you can't do that. So when someone asks, well, what wall wart or something can I buy that will work, you know, for something, if they just need, you know, something that simple and they don't want to do a power supply. And I always go, well, buy the Boss one. It will work perfectly.
Yeah.
A Boss PSA, you know, whatever that 9-volt power supply is they filtered it, and it's a digital power supply, switching power supply, but it's always dead silent. So you use that, you don't have an issue. You know,
I usually would tell them that, or the Full Tone used to make some good ones. I don't know if they're gettable anymore, but
yeah, I don't think so. Well, I just try to go for the one I know will work, you know, instead of guessing, well, is the Dunlop one going to work right? I'm not sure. So just get that. Yeah, it's a little more expensive, but it's better. And don't use the one spot one. I find it funny because the one spot one, I find that funny because one spot power supplies, the power supplies are great. Yeah. They work great. There's no issues with them. But their wall wart buzzes. It's awful. Why not fix that? Why are you offering these power supplies that work great and then this one thing? I don't get it.
They're not manufactured at the same place or by the same person, I don't think.
That's the same design or anything, yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting, though, one thing you said, Dave, a little earlier, and it made me think of one thing that I've kind of been saying for a long time, that, you know, I think that, you know, you because you build pedals, you understand this too, is that most people who are building pedals are not rig builders. And so they don't necessarily have the consideration in the course of the design that there's going to be 10 things before their pedal and 10 things after their pedal. Mm-hmm. And they're generally not testing it that way. Usually when you see guys testing stuff, they're testing it as though it's this island that's in this vacuum that is, you know, not going to see anything else. And then when you get it into the context of the rig, it reveals all these issues about, you know, whether the impedances they chose are not really that great with other things, or it's just not workable with other things, like, or it has to be driven by a certain pedal in order for it to work properly. and I'm sure you see this all the time, and this is why pedals that work great on their own are not always good picks for what goes in the rig.
Yeah. Oh, there's all sorts of issues that come up over the years. Fortunately, some of those issues have gone away now because the pedal's not made anymore, or we don't see them anymore. But
yeah,
like in older rigs, a lot of times we would there were a lot of pedals that were 9-volt AC based pedals, even like the whammies and things, the older whammies before they went DC, and or 12-volt AC, like a Hughes and Kettner Rotosphere pedal, which used to be really common. And actually, I still love that pedal.
One. I love it. It's great.
But so a lot of times rigs we built with that, we would build a custom power supply that did the 9-volt AC or the 12-volt AC, right? And we'd do, the initial thought originally was use a toroidal transformer in these power supplies.
Mm-hmm.
Well, those two pedals in particular hate a toroidal transformer for some reason. Causes all sorts of field noise, causes all sorts of noise, and they only liked an EI core transformer, which is hard to use sometimes on a pedal board because it creates a field hum with other things around it, and the old whammies only like the EI core transformer, and the same thing with the Rotosphere.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of times the Rotosphere would get its own wall wart, and it would just have its own wall wart somewhere as far away from everything as you could place it.
Yeah.
That used to be a
nightmare.
pain in the ass.
Yeah.
But you can't make a proper power supply that will power those two things. You can make one, but you better put it far away.
Did the pedal power AC, I guess for a lot of that, it didn't exist at that point. Because I think
even when it didn't work right with those pedals.
Oh, that's because it's a toroid.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Well, wait a minute. The pedal power AC. Well, it wasn't a toroid. It was actually like
a semi-toroid or a C core or an R core.
You know what? It might have worked on those pedals. It's been a while because I don't see those anymore because they don't exist.
They're also steel, so they had at least some electromagnetic shielding of the enclosure. It would have been tough for me, I guess, if you're making a custom power supply, because most of those, DIY boxes or the Bud boxes or the Hammonds, those are all aluminum too, so you weren't getting any help from the enclosure to shield with.
Let me tell you something. You guys have it all easy.
I know we do.
You have so many products now that make our job easy. So when I started in this business, do you know how many power supplies I made? Hand drilled boxes? Infinite number. Just drilling. I think my hand is still messed up to this day from that. I've made so many power supplies in my life. So I haven't made one in a million years now, but.
Where were you getting stuff from back then? Because in the 90s, you didn't have internet. So were you just ordering from like Pacific Radio or going to Pacific Radio? Were you ordering from Mauser catalogs that you would get in the mail?
Mauser Electronics or, Mauser, DigiKey, different.
But it was all catalog, right? It was all, you were going through a catalog and then finding the part.
It was a catalog, looking through the catalog, finding the part,
And you don't have like data sheets that are for everything, so you're kind of having to guess sometimes, like, is this going to work? And then you get it in the mail and they're like, oh, actually, that part won't work here.
Yeah, you had to learn how to make stuff, and you learned how to, and, it was less than perfect, too, because you're not doing every output isolated and stuff. And they were more common unless there was something really. Sometimes you do a few isolated taps for certain things on these power supplies, but man, we had to make them all the time. I mean, the good thing is that if you sold a power supply, I mean, you made it. It's kind of small amount of parts that actually go in it, and you actually did make a profit on it. But man, what a pain in the ass! You had to make everything custom. I mean, nothing existed.
Yeah.
And now you have a plethora of things that exist that will do it,
What did you use for like cables and plugs and stuff like that? Could you get those like Kobe Con style 2.1 millimeter barrels back in 1990?
You could actually.
Those
angles were available as long as I can remember. I don't recall ever using much different.
And what did you use for the cable for, like, because, there was no Voodoo Lab. You couldn't just go and buy, like a blunt cut, DC cable.
Exactly.
So
I mean,
what were you
we made
using?
them. We made them. So
what cable were you using back then for the DC?
That's a good question. I think there was some 2-conductor gray cable we found that worked well. I don't really
I think
remember.
I saw it in the slash rack. It's like a gray. Yeah.
That's maybe really old. Yeah, maybe. I don't remember what kind. I think we had to find it at the electronics store, go to Electronic City at the time, or go to Pacific Radio and find the cable that'll work for a power cable, that will work well,
Were you using Mogami back then for audio cable in the 90s? Or were you using Belden?
No, so the first stuff that was used was
like the RG stuff?
Electronics existed back then.
Okay.
But they used to make a cable called Musiflex.
Okay.
And Musiflex was used by Bob Bradshaw, and they made 2 kinds of Musiflex. And that was the first stuff we started using. And it was really easy because it didn't have any braid, or it didn't have actually the shield. It was like a drain wire, and there was a conductive vinyl shield in it, and then a center conductor, and that's it.
Okay.
And really, the shield was the conductive vinyl.
Okay.
That was doing it, and it was really easy to strip. I mean, you stripped it; you didn't have to unravel anything or do anything. You just stripped it and soldered. Go.
How'd it sound?
Super flexible. It was okay. And then later we started using Belden 9778.
God, that'd be so huge for like a rack or a pedal board. It would be so big.
Well, in a rack it worked fine, but it was a pain in the ass to use. I mean,
they're not easy to assemble.
Thinking about it now, just stripping it, my hands hurt. It's just like the rubber jacket, and
then it's got it's not PVC like the Mogami stuff. It's what's the material of the Belden? It's
rubber, like rubberized jacket.
Yeah, it's way harder to strip cleanly, and then you have. And then you have to kind of unravel that kind of the protection of the center conductor.
But there was a time when you didn't have to buy 1,000 feet of it.
Yeah,
like you do now if you want it.
Oh, believe me, I'm doing it. We're buying probably 12 or 15,000 feet a year of that for instrument cables.
Yeah. It's great. It sounds great. Yeah. We used that for a while, and then we moved. We're really into cable back then. We did a lot of things with cable, listening to cables and things. And I never liked the really high end cables that much. I don't think they sounded that great to me. And a variety of other people thought the same. There was a time we used a Proco cable in rigs because they made a smaller Proco cable, the 120 SM, and that worked great in rigs. Eventually moved away from that. Eventually kind of gave up. Went to Mogami. Now it's 2314.
Yeah.
Most for most of the pedal boards and stuff because that works the best.
Yeah.
It's quick and easy, and it's flexible, and it's nice. And now you can buy whatever power supply you want.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
And we can talk about that, but
well, I still love the 9778. I know you love it.
Yeah.
It's a great cable.
Absolutely. So
let's throw in another ad if we could, Brian, if you could take us away for our final ad break.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, so our final 2 sponsors, we actually just talked about them just briefly, is Bestronix. So Brad and the guys over at BTPA, they have a discount code DACHAIRS, DACHAIRS, for 10%. You can pick up cabling. They sell all sorts of stuff, plugs, 2.1 millimeters, 2.5. They sell it all. So they have a ton of stuff. Go hit them up. They make custom looms and all sorts of goodies that you need to complete your rig yourself. And a lot of the stuff that we use, they also have. So go check them out at btpa.com and use the code THECHAIRS. Our final sponsor would be Stringjoy. We call them the Netflix. I think we call them the Netflix of cabling, or the Netflix
of
or the of string cabling of strings, cabling on your guitar, of strings. So if you're not local to a guitar shop or something, and you need a shipment of strings or a subscription, they have options, so you can have a couple packs a week show up. If you're a couple packs a week guy or whatever you need, you gotta switch them out. You can get the strings sent to you, or you can just use their code BOARDS for 10% off. Get a pack of their strings, try them out. If you love them enough, go ahead and subscribe to their plan, and then you can get them in bulk and have them whenever you need it. So that's it for me. I'll pass it back to you, Mason.
All right. Thanks, Brian. So, Dave, maybe we can get more into some of the approved gear that maybe, I know we kind of touched on some of the stuff that was like wet, dry, wet specific, like the Musicom Lab stereo mixer, or the one that RJM makes. Another one that I want to throw out there, I don't know if you've messed with it at all, is the one that's made by Rolls. I think it's called the MX28. It's similar to kind of the style of like the RJM, except it just has individual volume controls for, I think, like each of the 3 stereo channel or like inputs on it. That one actually is pretty good, surprisingly, for the money. I think it's only $100, and it's made in the USA. I don't know how they do it.
I'm always think it's really made in the USA. I don't know about that.
I don't know. You can the baseline or the threshold for made in USA is lowered quite a bit. But anyway, I'd love to hear from you about like other stuff that you think would be good accessories for the wet, dry, wet, and pedals that are really great in the context of wet, dry, wet. Whether we're talking about reverbs, delays, choruses, things like that. And then maybe just generally, like we were talking about power supply, like, Friedman approved sort of things.
Sure. I mean, like, we'll start with some power supplies. I mean, like I said, we used to have to make them, and it used to be very painful on our hands after a while.
Did you have a template or anything like that you would use so that you could kind of recreate them?
No, man, you would tape off the box and draw lines. And, measure and get it, after a while you got used to really doing it, and you could do it really fast, but, and drill it all by hand. And boy, what a pain in the ass. I'm sure glad I don't do that anymore. Came the Voodoo Lab power supply, first, and they were the first company to really put one out that was all isolated supply. And, that used that for a long time, a lot of years.
Would that have been the late 90s?
Man, when did that come out? That's a good question.
The pedal power one, I think, was like late 90s. Because it was right kind of
late 90s?
Probably, because that was right around the time that they started coming out with, like, they were called, like, what was their name originally wasn't Voodoo Lab. And
Digital
that was
Music
kind of the
Corporation.
First, because they had the GCX stuff. Mm-hmm. And then I think that this was one of their first products as Voodoo Lab.
Right, exactly.
Because I think Josh had just moved out of LA. I think he had just kind of gone up to Sonoma County area and then launched that.
Right. Well, that worked, great until, the linear power supplies can't really, I don't feel should be used anymore. For one, I think the switch mode power supplies actually sound more like a battery, which is interesting. So the linear actually sounds different than the switch mode. I think the switch mode sounds closer to a battery. It's kind of interesting. I've done that test with several people. So when we started using the switch mode, I think you mentioned this on another show, we started using G-Lab power supplies.
Or Glab, as some people called it.
Yeah, and we used a shit ton of those, and they worked awesome for years and years. We used a shit ton of those, and then they were like the first one I remember of a switching power supply that was really cool. I mean, the greatest thing about a switching power supply is there is no field hum. The only field hum you might have is from the actual incoming AC that's coming in. So you have to remember that. And then, there was that, and what else? I don't know what came next exactly, but
for switch mode, it was probably the True Tone stuff.
Might have been the True Tone stuff.
Because they predated Strymon and all those as far as switch mode for their standalone power supplies.
True Tone stuff works great. I still use that on some rigs. I have my own. That's a 10 output, 9 volt. It says 300
power
milliamps.
bay.
Yeah, it says power grid. It says 300 mils, but really it's more like 400 mils an output. People ask me that, will it power this? Will it power that? Yes. You know what I found with ours, it works really well all the time, and I don't run into any issues with any of the rigs I've built with them. Now, when you start getting into the Strymon one and the new Voodoo Lab one, when you start getting into the add-on, when you're adding on one of those little accessory power things,
the extension supplies,
I've run into some digital weirdness.
Yeah,
with
there's some intermodulation issues that I've had.
The Strymons before. I've never run into that on mine. I've run into a couple slightly weird things, and mostly with extending them. A couple weird things with the Voodoo Lab Pedal Power 3 with extending, not itself, but the Pedal Power 3 Plus, the 12 output output one.
Yeah.
Man, that's 12 outputs. That's awesome. Just like get it in one thing, When you get into these big rigs, you're like, okay, let's consider what power supply is going to work best for this set of pedals, and and what can I expand? I used a bunch of the chalk stuff. DC7, it's great. It's super small, super light, and it powers really pretty high current, like particularly high current.
At any voltage.
And I've never added on to theirs because when I used a lot of those, they didn't have the add-ons done yet.
Yeah.
So I haven't really added on to it.
They're great.
But
I haven't had any issue.
The RCA thing is interesting. At first I was kind of like, I don't like this, because it's the RCAs. But after using them for a while, I'm like, man, this is a much better connection, actually.
It is.
Way better.
It's
more reliable.
solid, and it's not going anywhere. The other thing that bothers me a little bit is the zip cable, for their cables. But we just wind up using it. I wish it was round, I don't know.
We make our own on setups with a round cable and a Switchcraft RCA, and they are very solid.
Well, that's good on you. That's a lot of work.
Yep. It is.
I'm not much into doing that anymore.
Yeah, and by zip cable, for people who are listening, it's basically where instead of being like a traditional like Voodoo Lab or Strymon, it's like basically the two parts of the cable have like a seam in the middle, and they don't really dress very nicely comparatively. One issue, it works.
It works. So here's the thing: do you want a rig that works, or does it have to be just pretty? I think you want one that works. So I mean, pretty is one thing. Another thing we've learned over the years too, it's like, I know a lot of you guys there's a lot of tie downs you're doing and stuff. I've learned over the years that sometimes that's not always the greatest thing if you're on the road and you're touring a lot and you really have to figure out, wait a minute, where's that cable going? Something's broken here. Okay, what am I gonna,
it's like servicing a matchless.
Yeah, I don't quite do as much of the tie downs. We do tie downs, of course, and we make it look neat. But too many of them, it's just like, if I do have to do that, I don't want to cut them all off and have to redo them all.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It becomes, after a while, it's like, oh, maybe I shouldn't tie them down that much. It still needs to be tied down because that's part of the solidity of the whole rig. But yeah. There's just a random thought that popped into my head.
Yeah.
The power supplies. So most of the time I use mine, or I use True Tone or Chalks or Voodoo Lab these days. But I never use linear anymore, because if you're doing a pedal board with a switcher on it, and especially if it's a relay based switcher, like say the PBC-10 or something like that, it's really prone to proximity hum. Extremely. And, like I think you talked on another show about the 4x4, Voodoo Lab 4x4. And
that was brutal.
That was the worst of the bunch, man. Or some of the older chalks too. Those were horrible too. Like the Chocolat or whatever the big one was, man, just proximity hum crazy. Just don't do that. Just do a power supply that's a switching power supply that has every output isolated. Please try not to share as much as possible with anything, because the minute you share, you create a ground loop. Whether the average listener hears it or not, that's a different story, but you technically create a ground loop. And then to fix that ground loop, you need to cut the ground in one of the cables. Not all pedals play well with doing that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Some do, some don't. And you can do that if you know what you're doing and you are listening for the issues.
Yeah. Can I ask you, Dave, if you're going to parallel an output, like that for, let's just say, like a low current overdrive.
Yeah.
Do you usually do it at the source and like basically create a Y cable coming out of the output, or do you prefer to do it just like a daisy chain from like one pedal into the next?
I guess it would be rig dependent for me. I think I've done both. Mm-hmm. I've even done just one wire that goes to the other pedal, instead of the double wire. I don't necessarily do it from the source.
Okay.
But sometimes, yes.
Do you find though that one gives you a less probability of exaggerating the ground?
No, mm-hmm. No, it's the same. Mm-hmm. I find it's exactly the same. You still have a ground loop. So we cut the ground in the power cable. So
and the one that it's feeding to the second or to the.
But you can't do that with every pedal.
Yeah.
Like for instance, Boss pedals. No, never. Can't.
Is that because of the input jack?
No, the Boss pedals, for some reason, what happens with some of those is the problem that will present itself is the pedal will become hissier.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
I'm not sure the reasoning behind that, but maybe not all pedals, maybe not some of the newer ones, but it become hissier. So I've learned over the years, just don't do it with Boss pedals. MXR pedals you can lift; they're generally totally fine. Like a Phase 90 or something, you can lift the audio ground. If it's a modulating pedal, and I'm sharing it with something, a lot of times I'll pick the modulating one to be the grounded one, and then the other not. But the problem is the ground path then is going through the audio cables, and if you do too much of that, if you wiggle your audio cables, you'll hear noise on the jack.
Because there's DC on it.
Yeah, and it's not always just, what? If you can just do all isolated, just do all isolated.
Sounds like it's just better
in
practice.
In this day and age, this is going to give you the best results. The only time I ever do that splitting is if I know what I'm doing with the rig, and I know he needs one more. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, one more. We can do it with one, and this one pedal won't cause any issues. So, the less you do it, the better, I think, ultimately.
Yeah.
Just stop and just do. There's also other things. So, here's a really good one. So, recently, I just did a rig for Jason Hook, who has a new band called Flat Black. He used to be in Five Finger Death Punch band. And so in this guitar rack, pedals and things. So we had a Voodoo Lab power supply, the new Pedal Power 3 Plus. And he had a small little pedal board with two items, a Boss pitch pedals and one of the new Boss analog Space Echo, the bigger one, out on a little tiny pedal board out front. And so we needed to run, Audio Snake out of the rack, out to this little pedal board and back, and that's fine and dandy. But we also needed power, so I put it on like a little tiny flat pedal train, as small as it gets, kind of board. It's just two pedals. And I put one of the extender X4 extender Voodoo Lab extender boxes underneath the board, and the intent was to run down a 1/4 inch the 12-volt expand output down,
and then
the
just
snake.
Convert it back on once it gets to the pedal board.
Convert it back because it was just a real simple thing, and it was probably the most efficient way to do it. So put it up. Why is, when I turn the loop on for this pedal board, why is it noisy? I'm like, wonder what this is. Is it just audio cable back and forth? No. Powered the board with a separate power supply. Was quiet. Just the pedal alone, it was quiet. Just, plugged, Interesting. Okay. So I wonder, so we determined that 12 volt DC coming down the line on a normal 1/4-inch cable, so you have ground is ground, tip is hot, was causing noise being picked up by the other audio cables in the snake. What are we going to do to fix this? Interesting. And it was almost like a kind of a slight digital kind of noise, buzz, something. And I'm like, okay, so this digital signal out of the expand out is coming down, causing noise. How do we fix it? So the cable actually we used had 2 conductors in it. It was just the kind of cable we were using. And so I'm like, okay, I'm going to run the power down the 2 center conductors. Do a TRS on the rack end and ground the sleeve to ground. So then the sleeve is acting, and it's only tied at that end, and the sleeve is acting as a shield all the way down the snake of the 2 power wires that are going through it.
So did you use a TRS or
a TRS on the rack end and a tip sleeve on the pedalboard end?
Yep.
And just the shield is unterminated at the pedalboard end. You're just the center conductor.
You just cut it away.
So the shield is essentially shielding the cable, the power line that's going down this snake. Voila, fixed.
Beautiful.
Beautiful. I was like, that's interesting. Okay, but like a normal good DC, that isn't this digital expand out DC that's coming in the power supply. I don't know exactly what's going on there. Like a linear DC down that line wouldn't have caused that problem. So that, there is some interesting things with digital power supplies that can rear their ugly head. But that worked really well, and that fixed the problem.
I think the interesting thing that I'm hearing, Dave, which I love, is after 30 plus years of doing what you're doing, you're still learning. And maybe the biggest skill or the biggest assets you have after so long is your ability to troubleshoot as new gear is rolled out.
Right.
Alongside the fact that you still have all these lessons you've learned over the years, but the ability to troubleshoot and the patience to stick with a problem and find a solution is one of the biggest assets you have as a rig builder, amp builder, tech, whatever it might be.
I think, your experience will, you've honed your troubleshooting skills down a lot. And I mean, I came up with that solution like pretty instantaneously once I determined that was the issue.
Yeah.
I'm like, this should work if I do this. And it was fortunately easy to do because the snake was already made and everything. And
I was going to say, pulling a line out of a snake is not fun.
No. Yeah, that's a nightmare. Also, also pedal boards. I never put AC cords in pedalboard snakes.
Yeah,
because it causes noise.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of people that I can see offer that very service, and I'm just thinking like, what are they doing? And they have to be using a twin reverb or something like that, because there's just no way you would get away with that.
Yeah,
especially,
it causes,
I mean, having an effects loop is a ground loop, and it's just the nature of separating between the preamp and the power amp, and then you're adding in an AC cable, and you've got like this. Yeah, it's crazy.
Just the damn AC cable going down a long run of a snake with unbalanced cables in it. That's gonna cause some noise.
Yeah.
My might not be that much, but it's going to cause some noise unless you really go out of your way to make the AC cable with a shielded AC cable.
Yeah,
let's just not put it in the snake.
Yeah.
Let's power it separately. Let's run it separately, please. Just run it separately. You can get some cable that you can use as shielded AC cable, but and it will work essentially how I was describing this other problem. But it's kind of a pain to get, and just don't put it in the snake.
Yeah,
plug it in somewhere else. Don't run it back through the snake. I mean, I understand the point and why you wanted to do that, but it's just problematic sometimes. Not worth it. And what are other boxes that were thing? What's come up? What's new and useful recently is fixed pedal boards, as Mason knows. Tim at Robert F. Chapman are making little through boxes now. Passive through boxes that are TRS, that are isolated. All the throughs are isolated and properly referenced to the ground of the box, but without ground loops. I was involved at doing the audio throughs on that for him, and those are really cool. They can sell a pre-made box that has 2, 4, 6, 8 different things, and it's just really useful, instead of having to make an interface or something. I mean, we have a little interface to come with our pedal boards that we do, but a lot of times I'm doing custom things for people and stuff. And
or if you have a
really
switcher
nice.
And stuff like that, and you already have the buffers and stuff like that there, then having like a redundancy on an interface may not always be necessary.
Yeah, and it's a small little box.
Helpful.
You can just buy them. I mean, hey, I'd rather buy it than make it.
Absolutely.
If I can. And I essentially designed it. So, it works well and you can get it. And that's a cool product. So fixed pedal boards.
Is it on a PCB or is it just hand wired, just straight across with
each through is a PCB. Okay. And it's TRS. And then it's referenced to chassis ground through some 0.1 caps. So it's all isolated from each other. So you can do whatever you want with it. And it works great.
Love it.
Yeah.
Nice.
So that's a cool little thing that we like to use.
What about
these
for
days.
What about like pedals that you feel like are like work well? Like maybe we can kind of go categorically, like kind of like overdrive and distortion, modulation, delay, reverb, kind of maybe just the big food groups.
Let's start at the time-based stuff and
work backwards.
Delays. I mean, across the board, all the Strymon stuff is always great. I can't complain. It sounds awesome. Does a lot of things. And the nice thing about their stuff is, generally speaking, it's simple to use. It's not very complicated, and there's knobs for everything. It's not very complicated. Even the MIDI is relatively simple. Yeah. It can only take a certain amount of headroom. But it's relatively line level, it will not super hot line level, but it'll do pretty well. And it sounds amazing. The reverbs and stuff sound amazing, I think. Now, as far as delays go, if you're looking to emulate kind of like the older rack delays and things, I mean, for a long time, I was a big fan of the Boss DD500. I thought that was a great pedal because had
right behind Grant,
the vintage digital, section, which was the first foray into the SDE 3000, kind of thing. The thing about Boss the really important thing to remember about Boss is it will just always work. No matter what it is of a Boss, it will just work and it won't give you any problems whatsoever. Ever. And they're also like, you can run them over with a car practically and they still work. Yeah. I've seen some pedals that are so old and they look like they've been through war, but they're still working. And, there's something to be said for that, always working. Like a Boss pedal with its buffered in and out. Okay, you can argue all about this, but in a rig, it will always work properly without any surprises. So, I mean, the DD500 is awesome. The new foray into the old vintage rack delay is the Boss SD 3000 EVH. I haven't actually even seen the other one. I think everyone buys the EVH one. But, you know, they have two of them. I was involved a little bit in that development. And that was, man, I was up at Eddie Van Halen's studio with a RGM switcher, and we were switching between the pedal and the original SDE 3000s that were in his guitar rack. Back and forth in real time, you know, listening to make sure that it sounded just like it. And it did. And that was impressive. Those things sound amazing.
Yeah, I bought one the day they came
on how
out.
to use them a little bit, but you know, but if you learn them, you will have great results if you want that vintage style rack mount delay.
Yep, I bought it the day it came out. They're great.
It's awesome sounding.
It's a great sounding delay.
Yeah,
especially using it as the dual delay. That's exactly like the way you'd want to use it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you know, I think ultimately they put way too much in it that it does. But you know, if you strip it down to the basic dual delay setup, it's awesome. You know.
Yep.
You know, other delays. I don't. You know, those are some of my favorite delays. If you're looking for, if you're not trying to do like interesting filtered delays and stuff, if you want to do some of that, it's the Strymon stuff works really well. You know.
And would Eventide not make the list because of the digital dry-through or the converted dry-through?
Okay, the H9s and the H90s sound...
You can't use them in front of an amp.
You can't use them in front of the amp. They're very hissy. I find their interface to be fully aggravating all the time.
On the H9 especially.
Yeah.
I only used it with the app because I never learned the front face of the H9.
You can't. You're like, and every time I go to do a rig, it's like, okay, we got to change the MIDI channel in this H9.
Yeah, that's a
How do you do this again?
Yeah, someone get your computer out.
Because I don't own one. So I have to look. Yeah, I have to go on the computer, and it's like, okay, oh yeah, press this button and that button, and hold this down, and stand on your head, and hang upside down, and then unplug the power and plug it back in again. Okay, great. You know, I hate. Nothing annoys me more than don't make it so hard. Pete Thorne and I, who are good friends, and you know, he does all these pedal demos, and dude, he'll sometimes just like bitch about this stuff to no end. Like, why does it have to be this hard? I know what I'm doing, and it's hard. What's the average guitar player going to do? You know, like, you know, it's just like, I don't get it. You know, the thing that frustrated me, there was a thing that really was crazy for me was the Source Audio tremolo. So we had a guy that wants to tap his tremolo in the Source Audio. Okay. So yeah, this should be easy, right?
Via MIDI or on the pedal?
Via expression pedal.
Okay.
Or a tap
to the
pedal,
the Neuro Hub.
So,
my gosh.
On that one, you have to, okay, shit, how do I do this? Okay, let's look it up. That's a little cryptic. Then you realize, okay, I got to download the software for it. Oh, wait a minute. I got to find the right USB cable for it to fit the end. And, you know, every company has a different one, and it's infuriating after a while. And, you know, then you got to get it to work on your computer and make sure that it is working, you know, okay, great. Then you go on and you're looking at it and you're like, where on earth is this on this software? And then you figure out how to turn the tap function on. But then you realize that you need a proprietary tap foot switch
for
that unit.
It's not a
It's
momentary
not just
switch.
a momentary jack. It needs like a diode and something. I don't remember exactly what it needed, but you know. And then you go, I now have to, since I don't have their foot switch and their little cable, I now have to make it after you've dug for figuring out what I needed to make exactly. And then I had to make it. And then, you know, this is hours later.
Yeah.
All I wanted to do was turn the tap on. The other pedal on the board at the time was a DD 500. And it's like the guy that works for me was like, hey, can you change that to figure out how to turn the tap on for that external or whatever we were trying to do? I can't remember. He was done in 5 minutes without the manual.
Yep.
Just went in the menu and looks down. Oh, right here. Click. Oh, yeah. There we go. Okay, it's working.
It works. Yep.
It works. So again, boss, because it works.
Yeah.
And you know, don't make this gear so hard. If you're a designer and you're making this audio gear, don't make it so hard for the user. It shouldn't be that difficult. Don't put the feature on if it's going to be that hard.
Yep.
So how about modulation? Like we're talking, let's say chorus and tremolo, vibrato.
Well, okay. So one of my fave tremolos is the Strymon Flint.
Mm-hmm.
I love that trem. That's awesome. But you know, for you know, pitch detune, obviously the Eventide is still probably, you know, the Eventide H90 or the Eventide. You know, those are good boxes. H9
there's a straight detune one. What's it called? The micro pitch.
Yeah, the micro pitch. That's cool.
You got to use a mixer.
Awesome. Yeah. You got to use a mixer. Anything with the Eventide has to use a mixer. I find the Eventide just a little frustrating. That's my only issue. The other modulation, you know, the Boss MD 500 or the 200. Man, I got to say, when that box first came out, someone brought me one and put it on the board. And you could literally just take the rotary knob and went through everything on it. And you're just like, well, that sounds great. That one too. No, that one sounds good. So, you know, the Boss was the, you know, the originators of chorus, so to speak, you know?
Yeah.
And you know, you get your classic, you know, C2 and your classic C1 sounds. And they did a pretty good job with the Univibe, which is always really hard.
Yeah.
You know, their vibrato pedal was a classic.
Very good pedal.
Half the pedals in that modeler is pedals that they invented.
Exactly. And you know, the funny thing about that is, so you got a MIDI box that can do anything modulation wise. The pitch is even good. Everything in it's good. And it's pretty warm and analog-y sounding too. So that one works really well, you know, especially if you're looking for a box that does a bunch of stuff that you can just, you know, switch via MIDI if you got a switcher going on your board and stuff. I think that's when it's most useful. You know, because great
a lot
trems,
better than the
slicer, everything.
A lot better than the Mobius, in my opinion. I've never been able to connect with the Mobius, but I really like the Timeline Big Sky Delays Reverbs by Strymon, but I've never gotten into their modulation.
I would tend to agree, and you know, I have an argument all the time with Pete Thorne about that. He really likes the Mobius and stuff, and I'm like, I don't think it. I mean, it sounds good, it sounds great, but I just don't. When I turn it on, it doesn't go ooh.
Yep.
You know, and ooh to me is kind of an analog-y warmth. You know, like I call it the gooey factor. You know, it has some sort of. You know, any pedal that I try for the first time, it's like if I turn it on and I go, ooh, that sounds awesome. Yeah, it's great. You know, if you just go, oh, well, that sounds okay. I'm not into that. You know, that's why I kind of like that Boss modulation thing for sure. I think that's awesome.
What about for analog chorus? And I think Brian's got to run back to mine the shop, so we're going to finish up with just the three of us because I want to get through all of your recommendations, Dave. But Brian, thank you for hanging, and we will we will make sure that we memorialize you in the continuation of Dave's recommendations.
Yes, no, thank you. Yeah, no, I apologize. I have a couple people that are waiting on me.
I
but
understand.
I do appreciate the conversations today.
Yeah, man. Sure thing.
Awesome. Well, you guys continue, and I'll listen later.
Hey, Brian.
All right, thanks,
right.
Brian.
Bye, guys.
Awesome.
All right, so we're into analog chorus now.
And
So
are we talking of all time or current?
I think that maybe let's talk current, and let's also talk about like stuff. We kind of talked a little bit offline before we started about stuff that actually can work in the loop. So if you were gonna say do a wet, dry, wet style, you wanted to still have an analog chorus. How do you implant that in the context of an effects loop, or being driven by line level? Is there anything out there that you know of that can do it? That is,
to be honest, I wouldn't put analog chorus in the loop of anything.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, generally speaking, analog chorus to me goes in front of an amp.
Even in a tri-stereo chorus, like type of people are trying to emulate
the tri-stereo chorus is one thing, it's okay, but not many people are making a tri-stereo chorus anymore. You know what I mean?
None that are analog. Or I guess the Red 7 one can't do it.
The Free the Tone one is kind of cool, and I think that'll take level.
But it is digital, though, right?
Yeah, I think most stuff is, and that's the thing. Yeah, I mean, to me, analog chorus would be, like CE1s.
Yeah.
And I guess CE2 was analog too, wasn't it?
The Eddie Van Halen one, sorry, Grant.
You're good.
So the Eddie Van Halen one does have compensations for line level on the input and output.
Yeah, but I mean, line level, like I said, so line level isn't, I don't even see line level anymore most of the time. You know what I mean? It's just not, we're mostly dealing with pedal level these days.
Yeah.
Almost exclusively or slightly hotter than pedal level.
Mm-hmm.
Again, we have it too easy.
At that point, it's like, use a chorus out of an Eventide H9 or something, it'll do a pretty good job. Or H90, you can get some cool sounds out of that.
Yeah.
So, and other than that, you were talking about other pedals too. Like, what were the other options here? So for other pedals, like compressor or things like that.
Let's talk about. Maybe let's start with drives, because there's so many options out there,
man.
But let's restrict it.
That is so dependent on what kind of style of music, what amp,
let's restrict it to stuff. Let's make it more like legacy stuff that we know can work in the context of like most rigs. This pedal is going to work really well. Or we could, if we needed to separate it for like Marshalls and Fenders.
Tube Screamer.
Yeah, exactly.
Tube Screamer. Sorry, Tube Screamer works awesome for a variety of things, but mostly not into totally clean amps.
Yeah,
I don't think it should be used into a totally clean amp. It doesn't. You have that almost mixed, dry, dirty thing into a clean amp. If the amp is breaking up some, the Tube Screamer is great at pushing it more.
Yeah.
If you got a deluxe reverb on 7 or something, and you want to push it a little bit more, it works great. All like Stevie Ray Vaughan and stuff. Those amps were loud.
Mm-hmm.
So and
the gain was almost
distorting.
off on the Tube Screamer if you look at his settings.
Yeah, just pushing. Tube Screamer to me is a pedal that pushes a already dirty amp, or dirty or slightly crunchy amp, Great
Other
for Marshalls. Klon.
You think are kind of like that? Klon.
Klon or Klon clone, or the Archers, the Archer series. Those are awesome sounding pedals. The Wampler, the little Wampler Klon,
the Tumnus,
the Tumnus, the small one.
Mm-hmm.
I think that sounds amazing. I think that's a great pedal. But they're all boosty pedals, those are boosty pedals, some people love the classic Boss Super Overdrive for like a hard rock guy that's looking for this 80s thing into a JCM 800 or something. That works great.
Mm-hmm.
Very similar to a tube screamer circuit, kind of.
Yeah, just the clipping is a little different.
Yeah, clipping's a little different, asymmetrical clipping. And
Are you a blues breaker fan?
The the Marshall, the
pedal,
the
pedal
ones?
the pedal circuit,
pedal.
the not the amp.
Yeah, no, I understand that. They own Marshall pedals. Yeah, the Governor and the Blues Breaker, those were cool pedals, for sure. Saw a bunch of those. What else do you see? I mean, those are really common. The pushy overdrives, even EQ pedals that people use to push amps,
Yeah. How about like in terms
cool.
of boosts, like stuff that's more like linear boosts? What do you like?
Original microamp, the MXR one, the CAE MXR one works well for just a
the line driver.
One knob.
Very similar to the microamp, one knob, clean boost. We have one called a Buxom Boost, which has some EQ capabilities on it, and a tight knob, which is really cool. It's like a high pass filter. So you can really tighten up a signal. It works really well. There's tons of boosts.
RC booster, EP booster.
Yeah, EP booster is cool for that echoplexy sort of thing. RC booster, AC booster, those are all been used. Although I kind of find those two pedals to be sort of soulless. I don't really. They work fine, but they don't, to me, have a sound of any kind. And I kind of like things that have a sound or something that goes ooh, or something that's changing the signal so it's like a little bit better, just like, that's, as far as that goes. Yeah. High gain overdrive pedals. Well, the BEOD has turned out to be a really good pedal. If you want a high gain Marshall-y sort of sound, or the deluxe version of mine, the EVH one, if you want really high gain with a gate, that works really well. I'm forgetting a ton. There's so many overdrives. It's really a personal preference as far as overdrive goes. I just don't think there's one. There's a different pedal for everyone, sort of, so to speak.
What about for like compressors? What do you like?
I was always a fan of a old vintage Dynacomp. The vintage ones, though. Like a script logo one or a block logo one. Those always sounded amazing to me. The Exotic SP, the little guy, sounds really cool. It's also a really squashy one. The Origin ones,
the
little Origin one is amazing sounding. I think that's a great, it's not Dynacomp style. It's more, 1176 style, so to speak, or something. There's one MXR makes too that was originally the bass compressor.
Oh yeah, the studio
and then they
compressor.
called it the studio compressor. Yeah. That one's cool. There was a really cool one from I don't know if it's made anymore, from EBS that we used to use a lot. I forgot what it's called now. That was an awesome,
the dual comp or something like that.
Something like that. I just can't recall right now. But
it was like an optical, cool. Right?
Yeah, I used that a lot.
How about the Demeter compulator?
Compulator was kind of cool. That was also
the tremulator I like too.
Not tremulator really was a great tremolo. Yeah, sure. Except tremulator and the tremolo was really mellow. It like if you went into a dirty amp, it would disappear. It wouldn't chop really, so to speak. It was good for mellow stuff, Those are some of the. I'm sure I'm forgetting. The old Ross compressor was great,
Yeah.
But now they've reissued it.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on the new reissue?
I haven't played with it. I don't know.
They've been reissued a few times.
Josh probably did a good job. I would think. I would hope.
Yeah. Yep.
Maybe.
Time will tell.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it's such a known circuit at this point. I think it would be like finding a diner that
I don't know how you mess it up.
Yeah. But here's a compressor question that I'm curious about before we start to wrap up. So I'm always looking at a lot of the compressors that are coming out these days, and a lot of them, are kind of going more toward like the rack-based compressor, whether it's 1176 or LA2A. But when you see them on the context of a pedal board, they're right up front or relatively close to the guitar, whereas you would never have seen those compressors in use up front. They'd be after the mic in most cases. Yeah. And so this is a personal preference, of course, but as far as like using a compressor, I always think of it as really like an effect, and using it for something that is like pretty squashed and has a particular sound. And I usually gravitate toward a Dynacomp or an Orange Squeezer, or something that was designed with that in mind, or a Ross, where it was designed to be used right up in front with the guitar, and it was designed to be used as a very affected compression sound, and not as some sort of tool to kind of master and balance your a signal after it's already gone through the mic. What is your feeling on sort of like, this is not to disparage what Origin Effect is doing. I think that they make a great product, and I think it's well built. I think it sounds good. But do you think that maybe people are misunderstanding or maybe misusing if it's truly an 1176, should we be putting it right after our guitars?
Well, I mean, it's marketing. Yeah. It's just marketing. People have heard of 1176 before, so hey, let's make 1176 style pedal compressor, Yeah, no one would have used that in front. I agree. Does it sound good? Yeah, sure. Whatever they've made sounds good. Let's throw the 1176 out of the equation, and let's just listen to it as a pedal. Does it sound good or does it not? Yeah. Do you like how it compresses or do you not? I think ultimately that's it. Because, I mean, frankly, everything's marketing, right? You're trying to market, you're trying to grab something and market it with some form of, shall we say, bullshit. It just, that's what's done in every industry. Yeah. How many toothpastes are there? You know what I mean? Yeah. This one whitens your teeth. This one does this. This one does this. Oh, can you just give me the regular old toothpaste that was just like with nothing, that it does nothing other than clean my teeth?
But 9 out of 10 dentists recommended Dynacomp.
There you go. So yeah, compressors are also something that's very, individualistic too. What you're going to like. Yeah. Because it's how you want it to feel. It's about how it feels to me. Yeah. Yeah.
I like the Diamond one too. That was another good one.
Oh, that was good. Yeah, that was pretty good too.
The yellow.
Diamond also made a great trem.
Yeah, they did.
They made a tap tempo trem, which was fun,
And it was analog.
Yes, it was cool.
Yeah, a lot of people like the Empress one too.
There's a bunch of trems over the years that were kind of cool,
The orange Empress one was really popular in the 2000s, like the 2010s.
Yeah.
Remember that one?
Empress. Never was an overwhelming fan of Empress.
Yeah.
I don't know why. I mean, not that they didn't make any. I mean, they made some good stuff. I mean, it just none of it ever just grabbed me and said, "Buy me." Mm-hmm. That's what you look for. Something that the minute you hear it goes, "Buy me." I want it now.
That's the voice I'm trying to mute.
Yeah, I don't buy much more anymore because I just see so much of it, and it's just like I've learned endless, that I have favorites, and I have a bunch of old favorites that I've kept over time, and just it's endless. Yeah.
Well, I think for today we will call it. And Dave, I just want to firstly thank you for coming on, and I also just want to appreciate your contribution to our industry. Like you, as I said, are on the Mount Rushmore for rig builders, and the things that you set in motion, I think are very much part of how all of us do our jobs, is from standards that you created, along with guys like Robert Bradshaw, that are ubiquitous now in the industry. But as you had mentioned before, you were starting from nothing. You didn't have a voodoo lab power supply or a Chox or a True Tone or all the different options that we have. And so you really paved the way for people like me or Grant or Brian to be able to just easily be able to order something and get it in 2 days that's already made and can accommodate everything that we would do. You had to really put in all that time and develop those products as custom pieces. So thank you for your contribution to rig building, and thank you just for everything that you've done. And I'm so happy to see, that you have a great line of pedals, you have amazing amplifiers, and you're still offering your rig building services along with pedalboard based accessories. And again, if people are interested in any of those stereo Musicom mixers, they know how to contact you. We'll make sure that we put your contact information in the show notes and description. So if anybody wants to reach out to get one of those, they can. And this was just such a great time. I hope that we can do something again along these lines with you and continue to dive into all the geeky gear stuff.
Oh, sure. I mean, we barely touched on a whole bunch of stuff, over this time. But yeah, if anyone wants to reach me again, it's racksystems@yahoo.com. Or you can reach me at friedmanamps@gmail.com or various social media sites. But it's better if you just email me, I think. And if you need those Musicom Lab mixers, I do have some. So feel free to email me.
And you still build rigs for anybody? You don't just necessarily...
We build rigs for anyone, man. Just anywhere from the tiniest pedal board to wait a minute.
All right.
Ooh. Oh, boy.
So, look.
Oh, wow.
I don't know if you can see this very well.
Wow.
Look at that.
Jeez.
Look at this.
This is worth going on YouTube for.
This is going to be the largest pedal board. I mean, this thing is like my arm span.
Yeah. That's like a trap door under the stairs.
That's going to be the largest pedal board I've ever built.
Are you allowed to say who it's for?
George Pahone from a band called Cairo Knife Fight.
Wow.
Also plays in the Black Eyed Peas, but this is for Cairo Knife Fight.
Why does he need all those inputs and outputs?
Man, if you only knew how many amps and how much looping and how much all sorts of stuff is going on in this board, I don't even want to start it because it looks too daunting. I mean, this is going to take us weeks.
Yeah.
I mean, weeks of labor, weeks and weeks.
Yeah.
And we have to be very careful too doing it because it's just, do everything right the first time. That's another motto that I was going to bring up. Don't try, I guess I could just do this. Probably not going to work.
Yeah.
Do it right the first time. Transformer isolation, things done properly, and it'll, you won't have any issues in the end.
Yeah. Well, I'll light a candle for you for that pedal board.
Yeah, that's going to be, and that
looking
literally
forward to seeing the finished product.
Oh yeah, it's going to be awesome too. And we're always kind of we're going to actually start posting all this stuff soon because we just get so busy. We don't self-promote, it's word of mouth and stuff. And I have in the past a long time ago, but we've just been too busy with everything else. But we're going to actually start up the Instagram again and posting. We have a backlog of rigs that we've taken pictures of too. I can even go back on rigs that I used to post on forums and pull that back up too. Mm-hmm. It may be fun to see for everyone, So I'm going to start doing all that again.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, Dave, thank you again, and I hope to have you on at some point again in the future whenever you're willing and have time. And until next time, thank you everybody for watching. Make sure that you're subscribed, that you ring the bell, and that if you are so willing, write us a review on iTunes. We have a 5-star average review, and we are still #1 in Bangladesh. We're hoping that we can continue that and start to move further west with our #1 rating. So thank you for all those in Bangladesh that have kept us at #1 in our music space. And we'll see you next time.
Awesome.
Yeah. Thanks, Dave.
Bye.